Okay, everybody, welcome to lecture 3 of character rigging. So we're first going to start off with going over a review. Well, before we do that, do you guys have any questions on week 1's material or anything like that? You guys good?
I kept running into problems with when I did the fingers. I couldn't, I would parent them, the constraints would be there, but they wouldn't move with the body. So I didn't, and it wasn't order or anything, or what I was selecting. Just could not get those two.
I would check to see what you're, most likely what you were grabbing on there wasn't, what you were connecting to wasn't the right thing. Main thing is that when you select your joints, everything should turn purple. If it's not, then it's not on that same connection. So I would check to see what you're doing your driver and driven on. It's just a selection order, because that's not one of those things
I went through the video and followed what you said, the pads and how to do that. But
I could take a look at it. I'm sure it's like oh crap.
It's a small thing, I know. I'm stupid.
But no, that's fine. That happens. And like I said, hey, Morgan wishes everybody happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, Morgan. Wherever you are.
Exactly. I got a smiley face. Okay, so this week we're moving into week 2. And the first thing I want to talk about with week 2 is we're opening a new file. So the stuff from week 1, if you made mistakes, like with fingers and things like that, that's not going to penalize you on this week. Remember, laying out joints and doing test binds is a process. It's a job on rigging. It's something you need to know if you're going to be a rigger. It is its own thing. But then it branches off into 2 paths. You can either build controls or you can do real binding. The test bind is just there to make sure your joints are there. And I know it's kind of early if we really get that, but I always put my joints and throw a bind, because you see me lay out joints and I'm very confident, but when I come a different character, like let's say I'm doing a slug or I'm doing a disembodied head floating around with eyes in a jar or something like that, you never know. And I'm not going to be 100% confident where my joints are supposed to be on one system compared to another one, because I'm not a veterinarian. I don't understand the anatomy to that level. So I always have to research and practice. That being the case, I put my joints down and I do a test bind. And then I'm actually doing some quick weighting to see if the joints are actually making the geometry around it manipulate the way I want to. Because if you have bad joint placement, you're never really going to get the right bind that you're going to want. Your joints are not going to deform your geometry in the right way. You can work around it, but when you have good joint placement, the weighting almost does itself. So that's why it's really important to do that. I know it is really early in this process to do that, but it is something I do all the time. I mentioned before the controls is kind of a jump on there, because the controls is really the control pass and the binding pass, like the real binding pass. So those are things. Those can be done simultaneously with each other. And honestly, there's times I don't even have controls in my rig. Like if I'm doing a mocap rig, I might not have controls in it at all. Or at the very least, I might have controls added on top of the system as it is. So that's always a possibility. So in this case, we're moving on to week 2, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time because our internet connection is really slow. So if Morgan, if the performance goes really down, remember I am recording it, so you can always reflect back onto it as well. I'm recording it locally too. It's been one of those things. Everything's weird happening. Maybe it's Halloween. I don't know, but it's been like everything's been fighting me today. Okay. So, while this one's taking an intolerable amount of time to open. Okay, so under our lesson 1 create controls, this is our week 2 file. So I have my download here, and when I download this file, you're going to get 2 files in here instead of 1. And I do have this already kind of on my system. So when you open the file for this week's project, you're going to get your Excel sheet, which is your rubric, and you're going to have 2 files this time. The rabbit controls, or week 2 rabbit controls, is going to have the rabbit character. He's going to have pretty much the stuff done from week 1 on here. The joints are in the entire character, and the controls in the body. In this case, this is a little different, because instead of a bind on here, there is a proxy geometry. Now, I can do proxy system really quick and then start building the control system. And the reason why that's important, and you might ask, because I didn't really cover the proxy system in class, but I had those as extra credit. Did anybody do the proxy as extra credit? Got a couple people. Cool. The importance of the proxy system is that it's really fast. If you do it properly, I can actually automate this and do this within minutes onto it. If you're good, I'll show you different ways of doing that. So I know doing it the way I have in there is a little slower, but again, you have to know the long way to doing it. I could literally put the proxy system in minutes and then actually build a control system onto it. And then literally, if I'm on my paces, let's say if I'm not building any type of buttons to build the stuff for me, let's say I'm not doing any automation on this system, I know I can lay out joints for a character normally within an hour. And if it's a biped, yeah, definitely within an hour. If it's a weird character, maybe a bit longer. I might waffle on it, and I might like smash my head against the wall, like doing OCD things on that type of stuff. But in the same thing, once I get my joints laid down, I know I can get a base system down within a day. You know, the IKs, the arms, the fingers, and everything like that. And if I have buttons to do this for me, if I build scripts to do this for me, I can literally have a base control system within 2 hours, have the joints and the control system. In that case, I can give it to the animator, and the animator can start blocking out the animation onto it. Did I mention about Poe, from Kung Fu Panda last? Yeah, this is the same thing on here. So he does have the proxy stuff on here. So this is pretty common for me to have this. So we're going to actually rig the clavicles, the arms, the hands today, and then on Thursday we're going to do the legs, and then we're going to shift to IKFK. Now this is the system for here. We're going to be rigging the arms and the legs, but we're not going to be putting an IKFK system on this file. And the reason why that is it really takes a full lab just to do the IKFK, and you don't have that time because you have 2 labs. I want to have this character be a completely riggable character by the end of this week. I mean, sorry, completely animatable character by the end of this week. And that being said, the IKFK is kind of a luxury item on there because if you're not using the IKFK, it's just extra onto it. And most of the animators I work with do not use it. At the very least, they don't use the FK system very often onto it. And a lot of times when you're rigging characters, you rig characters specifically for different scenarios. So if there's only one scenario you need that to, or need a certain type of system, I'm going to build a rig for that scenario. Like if you're doing Spider-Man and he's swinging from his arms, I might make a special rig just so he swings properly on that type of thing. Most rigs get you 60 to 70% of where you need to go, and then the rest 30% are based on the scene. So yes, you will have dozens of Spider-Man rigs to do different things. He's fighting, he needs a bend in half. When he's falling on the ground, he has to flip up and everything like that. I'm sure you slow motioned, like I think it was Spider-Man 2. He was like on the ground and he did this thing where he did one of those karate like kick-ups type of thing, but his body practically bent in half to do it. It happened so quickly you couldn't really see it, but it gave him this rubbery elastic look to it. You know, maybe if I'm doing that type of stuff, I'd have a special rig for that. He does not need to be in his old rig all the time. So you will be rigging the arms, the hands, and the legs on here. And then you have another scene to do the IKFK. I still want you to know how to do IKFK, but I'm leaving it to its own scene. So if you make mistakes on it, you don't contaminate your main rig onto it. So in this case, this version, you have an IK arm and an FK arm. And you see how we have a separate binding arm. And this will be actually traveling between the two. All we're doing with this scene is actually transitioning between the two systems. The fact is IKFK is not the point here. I have 2 separate systems that don't overlap each other. Meaning, if I want a system that only has mocap or only has dynamics, I can do it with this system. So the fact is IKFK is not just IKFK. It's the ability of having a switching system between different systems. So yes, IKFK is the most obvious. You come off to it, but I can have 9 of these systems in here. I can have a dynamic, an IK, an FK, a stretchy. I can have all these different types of systems layered on top of each other. So you're just going to be in control of actually blending between these 2 systems on the left arm. And for extra credit, you can actually do the whole IKFK system on the right side of this arm. And if you're interested in rigging and you're really attacking this stuff, you can go back after this and go to the other character and then update him for it. So if you want to do it on the main character, get the character animator ready first and then go back and do it. Like I said, the reason why I'm staring at you because you want to do rigging, you do need to know. For riggers, you need to know how to IKFK. But for in this class, I want to introduce you to, especially if you're an animator and you want to see how to do this stuff, I want to show you what the mechanics are behind it. But in a week, that's a tall order to do a full IKFK system with your rig. So I would say the majority of guys wouldn't be able to get it done in the time. Probably a third could. And that's not fair for everybody else. So the point, you still get exposed to it, and you see how it's mechanically built. And if you're getting on top of it, you still have the ability to put extra credit on top of it. So I'm rewarding you if you push ahead onto it. Okay, cool. Now we look at the rubric. So on a rubric, the shoulders, we're going to cover in a short bit, is we're 10%, the arms are 15, the hands are 25, and the legs are 30. Like again, the legs and the IKFK we're doing in class. Now if you notice that when I look at all this stuff, everything at this point here, the 90% is on the normal rig. The IKFK is only worth 10%, the actual other scene onto it. So again, it doesn't contaminate if you struggle with it. Most people, when they get the IKFK, it's not hard. Most people get it. But again, it's more of a time restriction thing. Okay? So we have our breakdown on here too. Did you guys like the video critiques on your grades and everything? Oh, I guess I posted them yesterday, didn't I? So you might not have time to look at it. Let me know. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to open up our notes for creating controls. So I'm going to be in here. So we're going to talk about IK systems, and then we're going to move on to the hands on here as well. Okay.
Did you get all of them?
What's that?
The video critiques?
I did. I posted them yesterday, so it should be on there. Double for project 1?
Yeah, nothing. No comments, nothing.
I'll take a look on
Yeah, we
that.
should probably do that after class.
Oh wait, I'm okay. No, I'll take that back. I'm thinking of last month's project. I just finished everybody's grades from last month's project. So you guys just submitted. No. Okay. Sorry. It's Halloween. What can I say and everything? Everybody's like, "Well, you haven't done it." I was like, "Oh crap! I swear I submitted that stuff and everything." Now I was getting really nervous there for a second. Like, what? No, you guys would probably be graded around Thursday or Friday. I normally Wednesday's my grading day, but David's gonna do a lot of the grading for you guys onto it. So I'm normally pretty quick around it. Every once in a while, it goes onto the weekend, but it's pretty rare. But I will be doing video critiques for all your. You'll get videos for all your projects. Okay. So I'm gonna go into my notes for today. Okay. Still goddamn popping up. Okay. Let me see if I can open that up again. I'm trying to get rid of all the errors in the scene and everything. It's also the outliner I had open up in a lot of my scenes, and it freaks out my system every time I have that open. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to do something really basic, and like I said, if you're following along, this is more and easy to follow along with. I'm going to create joints, and I'm going to create 2 joint systems. I'm going to create 1, 2 as a joint system, and then I'm going to create 1, 2, 3 as my joint system like this. So by default, we have 2 types of control systems that you're going to have. You're going to have FK, which stands for forward kinematics, which is rotating. And then you have IK, which is actually called inverse kinematics, which is actually solving for a control system. I'm going to show you that in a second. I'm realizing I'm getting ahead of myself. So for instance, if I want to rotate this around, let's say I got a buoy and it's actually bobbing back and forth. I could do this here, and this could be a tail or an antenna or something like that. But if I have my joints here and I want to stretch this out, I have to actually counter animate an FK system to do this like that. And if I all of a sudden realize I need this here, that means I have to kind of rotate this back and kind of eyeball this to be into position, which is very annoying. Also, FKs do not obey. They pretty much. That's a word. I'm coming up blank in my head. They literally don't obey a certain locking point. So if I rotate this, I have to counter animate everything to match onto that. So IK systems allow us to actually pin and lock systems down. So I'm going to go into my IKs now. I'm in my rigging menu and under skeleton, and I'm going to go to create IK handle. Now there's 2 types of IK handles. There's actually a single chain, which is also called an SC solver, hence single chain, and a rotate plane called RP. Now the difference between these 2 is a single chain does not solve for an elbow doing this. where a rotate plane does on here. So why not just have rotate plane for everything? Because there's a lot of math going on this. And if you ever worked with IKs and had them pop and go crazy, they can be finicky if you don't know exactly how you do. Now, a lot of the reasons why I was having you draw your joints really straight is because the orientations are very clean and your everything's aligned, and that makes IKs very happy. So that's a lot of times when I'm very particular about my joint orientation and positioning is when I'm doing IK systems on it. So your arms and your legs and things like that, they have to be on these. They also have to be flat, and I'm going to talk about it. So I'm going to go into a single chain. So how do I create an IK? You see right now I'm in IK mode, and I see my little reticle that's up here. Now, if I click my first joint, and you see at the bottom left-hand corner, it tells me, hey, select your last joint for the end effector. That means that's the ending of the calculations for it. So I click here, you see I get an IK. So you click the first joint, then the last joint, and you get a little manipulator to move this around. If I want to increase or decrease the size of this manipulator, it's in the same spot as display, animation, and IK handle size. Normally, I don't have to worry too much about that. Normally, it's the right size. If you size it once, it's normally pretty good. Joints, not always the case. Okay. So when I look at my IK, ugly values, right? Your first reaction is to do what? Freeze transforms. Unfortunately, you cannot freeze transforms on IKs. They will not do what you expect them to do. At the very best, it just won't do anything. At the worst, it'll shift in another position just to say, hey, I don't like you. So you're not supposed to freeze transforms on it. So in other words, am I ever going to have the animator animate a IK handle by itself? No, never. So I'm going to have to build a control to manipulate this control. So yes, you're having layers of controls on top of each other. Yeah, exactly. Now, when I grab my joint chain, do you notice I have no rotations on here? So normally when you think about this, you're trying to think of what is the IK doing to my joint chain here. And what it's doing is, think of it as an aiming system. It's aiming to this end effector here. So is it translating it? No, it's actually rotating the joint. So if I screw something up and I delete my IK, I can get my joint chain back to my default values by just zeroing out my joint chain. Hence why it's so important that our values are zeroed. The fact is it does not mess with the translates means that if you do anything wrong with your IKs, as long as the joints are clean beforehand, you can always get it back. And it happens all the times where I break my systems. I put too much stuff onto it and they go crazy and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to put that IK back on. Click, click, like that. Now I'm going to do a rotate plane for this one here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my IK and I'm going to switch to rotate plane and same thing. Click the first one in the last point, which is going to be that end effector. We don't have quite as bad translation values on here, but we still can't freeze it out. This is another point that I really want to put on here. If you can play around with your IKs, like you can move them around and things like that, but you have to undo them right after playing around with them. Because remember, you can't zero them out and get them back to original position. You're like, really? Yeah, watch what happens when I zero it out. That's no good. The only way to fix that now is to delete the IKs and zero out my joints, which is no good. Okay. So look what happens when I grab my IK and move it in now. You see how it's stretching? Not stretching, let me do that. And see that's how it's coiling and extending my arm. So what is it doing to these joints? It's just rotating them to match those. It's just a much more advanced calculation that it's saying, okay, if this end effector's here, think of this as like a measurement tool, where it's saying, okay, if it's this part, then I want to rotate these to match this point on here, okay? So if I wanted to reset this back to default, I can grab and delete my IK, select my joints, and zero them out. Not the translates, just the rotates. I can't express how important it is to understand that to get your joints back to their default value, like if you get a contaminated IK system, delete the IK, zero out your joints. You might not have to do it in this class, but if you're rigging things, you will break things. It just happens. Okay, cool. So I mentioned something about an elbow. Do you notice in here? I have pole vectors. This is your elbow, but more importantly, we have a twist channel. If I grab this in middle mouse drag, you see it moves up and down the elbow, like that. Mm-hmm. That's one of the purposes of a rotate plane IK. Now, the confusing thing is if I grab the SCIK, it has the twist, but it doesn't do anything. So it's almost wish it wasn't in there, but it's because it doesn't have an elbow in that system. So again, why do I not just use rotate plane for everything? The actual twisting of the elbow does add more math to the system that in a very weird scenario can break things. So at this point in this class, we're not doing a lot of really exotic things, but did I show you the spider pumpkin in this class? Oh, I'll show you. I'll show you an example of it real quick. I had a rig I did a while back. I know I'm recording this, so it's going to be up there for prosperity's sakes. Okay, here we go. So this is a rig I did a while back. This is an Unreal character. Well, it's not in Unreal, but it was a game rig that went into the Unreal Engine. Now, this is actually, he's a gourd that has spider legs coming out of him. This is actually the finished rig, because this guy's pretty exotic, because if I grab his leg, that's actually the control on his system. The geometry is the controls on him. So I can grab and I can move this around, and you can see how it actually deforms and moves with them. You can really see this. Now, the question is why I built this system. I found a guy online that was describing this process, and he did it on a really simple system, and I kind of built on top of it and made it, I expanded onto it. He did it on like a sphere. But you'll find really quickly spheres are not rigs. So making that system work on a full character sounds great, but it doesn't work. But like reason why I did this is that because his mandibles, he's got a control here, like this. He's got a control here. He's got a control here, like this. And he's got a pole vector here. I didn't want to have 8 controls sitting around each other, right in the middle part. That would have been very pain in the ass to actually deal with onto it. So that's made it a lot cleaner to do this. That being said, on here, the reason why I brought this up wasn't just to show off my rig. It was to actually show you this. The little his little like stem up here. He wanted it to be able to bounce a little bit. So what I did is I could not do freehand with this because how it curled around just didn't work right for that. So I actually had to use there's a joint tool that will try to put the joint in the middle of the geometry. It's a piece of garbage tool. I had to go in there and clean up all the orientations on it, but it did get me a good joint layout, even though I had to fix all the joints after the fact. The important thing here is that I drew an IK from here all the way up here, and it created this system. I do not need an elbow for this. You see, I can stretch it out. It is just an IK. Do you see it though? You see how this is the IK right here? I don't need a pole vector for that. But to me, this is just an arm. So that was one of the solutions I did. It was a weird solution, but it has no elbow. There's no reason to put an elbow in that. A single chainsaw worked perfectly for that. So the big key thing is to use different scenarios. You use a bunch of these tools, and there's no rules to actually how you're going to implement these things. It just doesn't give the animator the ability to do what they need to do, and that's it. So at the end of the day, this is pretty easy, and his little cord comes off like that. Now you notice there's like a whole crap load of joints going off here because this is actually an Unreal character, or it goes into an Unreal Engine. You can't do indirect systems in Unreal. It has to be a single chain, so that's why there's joint chains going from everywhere from our central area here. And also, he's got these little eye things in here. So if I hide his joints again, he's got little planes in there. So you can have little lights underneath it, so his eyes glow and things like that. So, but yeah, that's a character I did a while ago. Believe it or not, this control system did not work until the night before I was going to submit it to the artist because it just wasn't working. The technology, I was missing something in it. And it just, I built a tool to build it for me so that when I clicked it, it was done. But I couldn't get it to work right. It was just, they weren't working well together. I got you. I'll give you 1 second. But all of a sudden, like late at night, I figured out what I was doing wrong. And I fixed that in my tool to automate it. And then I went through and I replaced all the controls on the entire character with that onto it. If you want to know more about that, just let me know. I mean, this is nice and fancy, but I built it for the ends of the means. It wasn't because I was being shiny and happy on it. It definitely had a result onto it. Yes. I actually gave it to the instructor and they animated it, but I haven't been all on top of getting back the animation as much. Also, I have the textures and I haven't applied it to it because you get blinders for that stuff. It's like I rarely get to see the textures on my characters anyway. So the fact is I rigged it and it worked and they're happy with it. I kind of like, moved it on and everything. Because I have like another guy that I did for them. And this guy here. I really like this guy.
So do you just keep like iterations of saves? Or...
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are my saves.
Yeah, I was just wondering what that was.
Yeah. I will be hammering you on that a lot throughout this month. So this is another character I did a while ago too. He's got a little mouth on him, so you can just like like that. And he's got a stretchy system on it. Yeah, he's got little tendrils. And we're going to be covering this type of stretchy system this month. We'll be doing it on tongue. His haunch lifts up like that. Like that. So he had this. This is another good example of having a rig where the animator wanted something that I had no idea that they really needed. Like, for instance, I was doing this. And he's got these little mouth controls where you can, grab his lips and do that. Like that. And he said, I really need to have a system to lift the teeth up. And like, why would you lift the teeth up without opening the mouth? That makes no sense to this. Because he was saying, I need to offset. So when he's closing, I want to close these at a faster rate than his mouth is opening and closing. So it creates a better chopping motion type of thing. It's like, oh, yeah, I can do that. That's not hard. I just didn't know you would even need that. So that's why communicating with the animator is going to tell you, because that is not anatomically what you would need. Granted, if you think of great white, the great white kind of folds its lips up when its teeth are coming out. So it's kind of like that. If you wanted to do that type of effect, I could do that easier with this. I never even thought about that. Communicating with your animator is very important. Yes. Sure.
I was really hoping you would say like they needed this, and I didn't like the animator, so I didn't want it.
No. They're just big. Remember, this was when Unreal too. So I put joints for each parts of the lip and everything like that. And he's got a little smile on here, so you can just, it's subtle, but you can like, yeah.
Is that the whole rig for Unreal? Does that apply to Unity?
Yes. Anything from the Unreal stuff will go completely into Unity, but you can do indirect in Unity.
Okay.
So depending on the game engine, different rules apply. I have no idea about Frostbite. I have no idea about Crytek because I've never really supported into those engines. I know if you do a single chain system, it'll go into every game engine that I know of. There might be naming conventions and weird stuff like that that goes into it. But like I said, if you want to know more about that stuff, I'm more than happy to talk about my experience on that type of stuff as well. Yes. Just all one chain for everything. Instead of having the pads, they're directly parented to each other. It does make things more complicated when you do that, because what we're going to cover today is how to pin hands, and that becomes a lot more pain in the butt with that type of system. Also, it means you can't swap things out easily when you're in that. Now, I can rig like an indirect and make a tool that actually converts it into a single chain if I need to, if that's something I really want to work with my pipeline. But game rigs are pretty small. If this was like a giant, like if this was a film res character, I would not want to do a single chain system. But game characters, they're pretty small. They don't have a lot going on, so it's not nearly as bad onto it. Anything with fingers. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So how long did that rig take you? You didn't have that many saves.
I'd say that rig it didn't take me 2 days, but it shouldn't take me more than 2 or 3 days to rig that character. A lot is because when I work here, I can't focus completely onto it. But if I was at a studio, if I was on my A game on that, I would have that guy done in 2 days. And if it was actually a really high pressure, like if this was like an extra, probably a day onto it. I had a friend who worked on the Ghostbusters game. It was a long time ago, but he worked on the Ghostbusters game, and it was his first job coming out in the studio. And I go, yeah, when you come in, we'll come in and we'll give you a character to do, and you'll have a couple days to work on it or something like that. I want to say it was like a week, but he said like a couple days or something like that. And he came in, and they gave him a Ghostbuster, and he had to rig him in a day. So, so that was like, oh, not only is it not just a ghost, it's actually a hero character onto it. Granted, it is a game character and things like that. I don't know if that included the proton pack and the wiring for that and everything like that. But yeah, it can be smaller studios can have a much different turnaround time. Or other times I'll have places where you'll start at a studio and they'll pretty much forget about you. Like me personally, the first job I got, they sat me down at a desk and I didn't have any tasks for 3 days. So I'm thinking they're going to fire me. Like, oh, is this the day that they fire me? Because they have to allocate tasks to you They already have everything allocated, so they have to wait for new stuff to come up to give it to you. And you don't know what the pipe is, so you can't. They'll tell you. My boss would say, "Oh, just pick up. If you go on to the, they have like a ticket system where you can see everybody's tasks and everything. If you see a ticket that's needs to be done and you can solve it, just go take it and solve it." And I was looking at these things. I have no idea what this stuff is talking about. So it was like that was stressful onto it. And then eventually they integrate you in. Like I said, I've had other people where they want things done immediately, and they have other ones where it takes time to involve you in. It really depends where you're at. Games can be a little faster paced because there's a lot more hats you wear when you're in a game, and because you're just not as big as teams. Again, of course, if you're like Rockstar, it's a different story because you have 1,000 people working there and blah blah blah. But if you're in a small studio or indie studio, yeah, you are a big factor in how that game comes about. So the more work you put into, the faster the game progresses. Where if you work at EA, it's really hard to see that stuff because everybody's like a tiny cog in a big machine, and it's like everything kind of moves at this snail's pace type of thing, and your contribution doesn't seem like it's the like big changes happen and everything. Well, it's different. It's completely different. Okay, and I'm BSing. I'm going on and on and on. Okay, which I'm sure you guys don't mind because you're like you hear that type of stuff, but for me it's like old war stories and everything like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go into my ARM system, and I'm going to go into my build IK systems. Okay, so I got my my Yeti character in here, and what I want to do is I want to build IKs for him. Okay, so I want to build an IK for his arm. Now it's only 2 chains on here, so this is a prime candidate for a single chain IK. My joint chain does have rotations on it, which I am surprised at that, so I'm going to freeze that out. That will cause problems on it. Before I do that, I want to make sure that that doesn't need to be reset. No, okay, definitely doesn't. Okay, so for some reason that was not clean. Okay, so I clean that up, and now I'm going to go into my IK tool. Okay, now this is a single chain because it's just 2 arms. Now, as you can see, it's kind of like I could definitely select this one in here and that one, and I get my IK. Okay, and I got that. Now I'll probably name this something like left clav IK. Now, in this case, remember that this is for our eyes only. So your naming is very much could be mechanical on this case. It's not, the animator's not going to be animating this. And if you see an animator animating IKs, you can slap their hand away from their mouse. Stop that! Don't do that. Okay, so now we have our arm here that we're going to draw an IK for. This is obviously going to be a rotate plane because there's an elbow. However, as you can see, the end joint is being obscured by the hand on top of it. So how do we draw IKs when we have an obscured joint? We can do this in the outliner. Okay, so I'm going to open up my outliner like this. I'm going to find my joint chain. So that's my hand. I'm going to expand my arm. I'm going to go into my IK system. I'm going to switch from single chain to rotate plane. I'm going to click my first joint in the outliner. I hold down Command, and I select my last one. I prefer this method, actually. Huh?
Single shot. I think it's still single solid.
Oh. Cool, thank you. Okay, so I hold down Command, and I select the other one, and it creates my IK. Okay? Left, arm, IK. Cool. So again, I can grab my IK, move it around to test it. I can even grab my twist and rotate it up and down. This is a good time to talk about our angles on our arms. I'm going to delete this real quick, and I'm going to look at my joint chain to see if there's any rotations. There's none. Okay? How do I know that the arm is supposed to bend in this direction here? Well, it doesn't, but how does Maya know that? It doesn't. Now, the question here is, since there's a bend in it, it knows. But what if it's straight? It doesn't know. So is there a way of telling it that there's a certain angle it's supposed to bend? Yes. No, not the pull vector. If I actually hold down right-click, no, why'd you do that? You see it says set preferred angle on the joint here? So what I'll do is I'll rotate it in that direction. What are you doing there? I'll rotate it into an angle. I'll hold down right-click on it, and I'll say set preferred angle, like that. Now, what do you think the most common mistake on this is? People undo back. What happens when you undo back? You take your set preferred angle off. So you'll have to zero it out instead of do that. In this character, you don't have to worry about that. The rabbit, you might have to worry about it. 'Cause I think there is a little bend in his arm. But I rig a lot of characters where they're straight armed, and you do have to be careful about that. Okay, so now I can draw my IK again. No, that's not that. I'm going here. Okay, click my first joint. The last joint, there's my IK. How do I know I have a RP solver on my arm? It says on the inputs. Every once in a while, I'll have someone try to put an elbow system on there, and it goes, it says I can't solve the pull vector. It's like, do you have a single chain? No. And I look at it and it goes, it says single chain. I swear I put a rotate plane. It's like, I know you swear lots of things, but all I can do is say what I see right here. It's not on there. Left arm. Okay. Okay. Cool. Any questions so far? You guys good? I've been BSing a little bit more than usual today. It's Halloween, exactly. It's our excuse for everything. So now I'm going to go into the next one. I'm going to go into my build arm controls in this case. Okay. Now I got my arms built on both sides, and I have controls here. Now, here's the question. Am I going to be rotating the system or translating the system? Translating. It's some way of thinking that an IK literally converts translation into rotation. So if I bring this in, it actually converts this into a rotation here. So think about this. If I build a control, what makes more sense? Going in degrees, like 15, 30, 45, you know, or wow, I was thinking there, like 0, 45, 90, and so forth, or going in like integrals, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I think 1 and 2 and 3, it's a pretty easy number to wrap your head around. 15 degrees, like what's 15 degrees? And what's it relating onto? So that's sometimes it's good to convert things into translations because it makes it easier to identify. Okay, so that being said, since we're translating, the pivot point's not as important. Pivot point's about rotation. So since it's actually literally like it's a translation, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to grab this control and duplicate it and bring it up and bring it over like that. I'm going to rotate it down so it's pointing. Okay. Like that. Okay, I'll freeze it. I'm going to call this my left clavicle icon. Oh, you can call that shoulder too. This is what the animator sees, so it's whatever actually works better for that. We might want to skew this off a little bit so it actually stands out. Why is my system not in Oh, never mind. I froze it. My brain's not smart today. Okay. Bring back my translate so I can rotate it around like that. And freeze it. Okay. So now I got a little angle on there. Again, the pivot point doesn't matter on this one. So the question is, what would make it more sense for the animator? Here or here? What would be easier for the animator to see? Here or here? Or for your OCD nature in you, or there, which like I said, people get all like crazed out. Honestly, they're both okay, but I think this is a little cleaner, or even here is cleaner on that. So I'm gonna freeze that out, and we're gonna leave that there. Okay, so now we're gonna do the arm. So I'm gonna grab this one, I'm gonna duplicate it, and I'm gonna snap this one down right on top of the joint. Now I'm gonna hide my geometry, and I'm gonna snap right on there, and when you're building these controls, the visibility of the control is very important. How easy is it to see? And I ask yourself, how often you're going to be animating the arms? A lot. So you want a control that's very easy to see from multiple angles. So I can do stuff like this, like that. And you see how I can see that from every angle? That makes me happy. Now I am putting the pivot point here because that makes the most sense onto it. So I'm going to freeze that. I'm going to name this my left arm icon. Okay? Cool? You want to see a trick? Now, this is not in the podcast. I probably should make one of these. I know you guys get OCD and you want to make the exact same controls mirrored on the other side. There is no mirroring tool inside of for building controls, because remember, these are not meant for you. They're meant for modelers. That's what these controls are meant for. So that being said, is there a way of mirroring these guys on the other side? Well, yes, but it's a little bit of a trick. So let's say I grab both these controls. Why is this one actually curved through? So this is going to be my left. Let's call this shoulder icon. Okay, so I grab both of these, and I'm going to group them. I'm going to group them together. Why? Because you see how I get a pivot point here? If I scale this on -x, you see how it kind of goes to the other side? So if I actually did this at -1, you see how it mirrors onto the other side like that? So if I duplicate this group, and then I scale that group on -1 on x, mirrored, like that. Now you can't mirror controls, like you can't mirror the functionality of the controls. Like if you start connecting the IKs, that stuff does not go over there. You still have to reconnect that stuff. And now I can just go in and I can name these right. Could I build a script to do this for me? Yes. I can even do it to rename all my stuff. Yes, I do. I do not, but I can.
No,
If you...
you did.
Oh, did I?
The-
Oh, did I do?
the boxy one, yeah.
Oh, okay.
With the geometry at least.
Okay.
Same thing.
Okay. Cool. So we got our controls. We need to connect them. How do I connect them? Well, we got two options. We can use a parent or we can use a constraint. Now the question here is the animator ever going to animate the IK? No. So can we do a parent constraint between the two of these? Yes. So I say driver, and I know I'm giving the voice like there's something wrong with that, but we go driver and driven, and I go into my constraint like this. I'm going to keep my maintain offset on, and I hit apply, and now when I grab my IK, you see it moves up and down. That's completely fine. Okay. Any downsides on this? Sometimes when you're animating this and undoing, it doesn't like the IK will not move back down with it. It'll do something like this. It'll stay up like that, and you'll have to jiggle the control to snap it around. That freaks out animators. I don't see it all the time. It happens every once in a while. The other method of doing this is parenting it. So let me actually delete this constraint. And if I take my IK and then middle mouse drag it right underneath, all this other crap can, oh, because I have my DAG stuff turned on. There we go. If I grab my IK and I middle mouse drag it under my shoulder icon like this and I parent it, is this legal? Yes. Because you can parent IKs, you can parent controls to each other. An IK is a control, and obviously this NURBS curve, this arrow is a control. Which one's better? They both have their pluses and minuses. Which one do I use? I parent them. David actually uses constraints between the two because you can organize where your IKs are. Like if you use constraints, you can parent all your IKs under one group and have access to them very easily. Where if you parent them, now they're underneath that joint, so you have to, or underneath that system, and you have to find them. So if you're doing like a centipede, that's kind of a pain in the butt because you have to go under each leg to actually clean them up or mess with them. I don't care. What I don't want you doing is mixing and matching that. Pick either parenting or constraining, one or the other. Don't do one as parent unless you have a damn good reason to do it. Okay? And I would ask on that. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to parent this control, the IK, under my arm, like this. Okay? And now we have a system that can be animated. See? Cool. And I can zero these out. Oh, wrong one. See? Okay. Now I want to control my elbow, this guy. That. Okay? This is actually pretty easy. I got my arrow. I'm going to hide my joints. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to snap it up, and I'm going to slide it back and make it smaller. I'm also going to, like that. Freeze it. This is going to be my left elbow. Okay. Now this guy's a little weird. And what I mean by that is that this system is aiming to this control. And what I mean by that is that if I move my pivot point up here, the second I move my IK in, do you see how now the system is in front? That means it's going to aim to this, and the elbow is going to bend around and aim towards that. So we do want to keep our pivot point away from our arm, okay? That's what pole vectors are. They're aiming systems onto it. What's the order of constraints? What is the terminology I use for that? Driver driven, right? What's the driver here? It's going to be, there's actually is a constraint for this. If I go into a constraint, you see this pole vector. So what's our driver? Driver's the IK? What's driving the animation? The control. This is my driver, and what's my driven? Is it the joint? What has the pole vector? It's the IK. I try to trick people with that, because people will select the joint, and then they'll try to do a pole vector, and it goes, I can't do that, because it's not on that. And then they'll do a parent constraint, and that'll ruin everything. It's driver, driven, because remember, the pole vector is right here, like that. So driver, driven, and then I do constraint, pole vector, and then bring back my geometry. Okay. Cool. That's our shoulder and arm. Okay. Your shoulder's worth 10% of your grade. Your arm's worth 15. Okay. So that's already 25% of our grade. That leads us into our last part of today, which is the hand, which is worth 25. And that's including setting up the hand itself and doing the fingers. Now, we're not going to have time to do fingers today, but most people don't make mistakes when they get to that. But they're doing a system called set-driven keys, which we're going to be doing an integrated session today, which honestly, set-driven keys are one of my favorite things. That and blend shapes are my two favorite things. They're awesome. Okay, so that being said, does anybody have any questions? Are we good? You good, Morgan? There's good. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my next area, which is actually something called world versus local controls, and I'm going to local orientation. Now, I have a separate podcast just for this area. So the beginning part here, I'm just going to kind of show you some theory, and then I'll have some playground stuff for you to mess around with on here. Okay, so you guys have been building controls in week 1. Let's say we got these back controls, and I duplicate them, and I move them in a position like this, right? Okay. And then I freeze these guys out. You remember that from week 1? We're doing these guys here. Okay. These are called world-oriented control. Why? Because you see down here, this is our actual world axis. You see Y is up, X is forward, and Z is out the side. And we look up here, do you see how Y is up, X is forward, and Z is face off to the side on here? Is our joint world orientation? No. You see how Y is facing this direction, X is facing up. This is what's called a local orientation on here. Now, in the case of what we were rigging on last week, especially Thursday, it makes sense to make a control where it's very simple to do stuff. Now, this is a simple base control. Now, when I rotate this down like this, like let's say I rotate this like here. You see it's rotate X right here? Watch what happens when I rotate this to the side. You see it's rotate Y? Okay. So when I'm doing a constraint, and I say driver, driven, and I do a constraint, and I go into my parent constraint, I've been telling you to leave this on the whole time, maintain offset. What that does is it tells us, it even says it preserves the initial offset. It means it preserves the initial value that's on here. So when I hit apply here, watch what happens when I grab my control and I rotate it here. You see it says rotate X here, and then I select my joint and it says rotate Y. That constraint converts the value from one to the other. And when I go in and I go into my, my attribute editor and I go into my constraint, you will see in here, when I go into my constraint attributes, you'll see there's an offset in here. There's actually a difference on here. Now, this is fine for this example because it's a very simple system. However, when you get to more advanced systems like your hand, which you're going through, what is a common animation issue with your hands? You ever heard the term gimbal lock? Yeah, everyone's like, yeah, I hate that stuff. Well, that's what happens when you lose one of your axes when you're animating. So let me see if I can explain this. By default, as you can see, my axes are kind of falling along here, and this is because this is actually a cheating system. It's actually not showing you the proper math on here. If I change this into a gimbal mode, you'll notice that when I move this, the axes are going to act different. You see how they're like one axis is moving around like that? You see how this, in this case, if I move my Y across, you see how all of a sudden I'm missing an axis right here? So how in the world do I rotate down like this? Well, what happens is when we're in object mode here, you see how we're getting all kinds of rotations? It's counter animating to make those three down there. Now, so what that means is the graph editor is going to be a nightmare to look at. Also, you can have your hand flip out and do some weird stuff when it's on there. Now, here's the problem. When you have a really involved control system like this, when you're doing a lot like your wrists and your hands, what you can have happen is you can get that gimbal lock. But here's an even worse thing. The constraint can get gimbal lock underneath it because it's animating something. So you can actually grab a control and do this, but instead it actually goes in the wrong direction onto it because it's actually rotating all those other axes. That can be really, really infuriating. So to alleviate the possibilities that when you have controls, you're really pushing those different types of rotations, we instead of having controls that are world-oriented, we want to have controls that are mirroring the orientation of the joint. In other words, local-oriented controls. Okay? So here's a good example of when we need a local-oriented control. I got this tail in here. Do you see how this tail is not in a world axis properly? Like, let's say, watch what happens when I go into world. Do you see how it's kind of halfway in between those two? Watch what happens when I rotate this from side to side. You see how that's really nice and clean on here, like that? But if I actually put this in world mode and I rotate this, you see how it's all crazy and everything like that? That's what the constraint is doing underneath the hood. It's doing stuff like that. So it makes more sense to have the control match the orientation so you get this type of stuff. Also, the graph editor is really easy to see. Okay? I can catch that glazed look on everybody's face. So I'm not looking at anybody. But here's an example on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a control. Why my Arnold stuff pop up? I'm going to create a circle like this. And I'm going to duplicate this and move it up here like that. You see how it's world right now? So of course, I'm going to match it. I'm going to do this. Okay. I'm going to move it down like this. Okay. No, of course, I'm in still in world. Okay. Okay, do you see how it's pretty close to my joint chain? Like that? See how they're pretty close to each other? Is this an animator ready control? I don't know about you, but negative 89.494 and 69.815 is a new zero. Everybody gets that. It comes right off. So what's your reaction? How do I fix this control? That freeze transforms, exactly. But however, what freeze transform is really doing is it looks at what's above it. It matches that orientation. What's above this control? World. So if that's no good, that's what we're going to do. We need to make a system that has a separate orientation. So I don't want to get ahead of myself on there. So now I want to show you another system. I got a control here, and I'm going to duplicate this and make one a little bigger on the outside, like this. Okay? And I'm going to call this guy inner icon, and this guy outer icon. Okay? And we're going to freeze both of these guys. I'm going to parent the inner underneath the outer. Okay. Cool. Do you see that are all zero values? The inner and the outer are zero, like that? Am I correct on that? Okay, so what happens if I grab the outer control and bring it up by 1? What happens if I actually look at my inner control? What is the value of my inner control right now? Is it 1? It is. because it's inheriting the values onto it. What happens if I unparent my inner control? Because now it does. Now if I froze it now it would get all kind of weird and everything on this. This is why our joints are easy to keep track of, because they never lose their translations. Freeze transform doesn't work on those. Okay, so if I move this up to 2, what happens if I parent it back under the outer icon? What's the value of the inner icon then? So changes made to the control are remembered, but that offset value is always going to be there on it. Now, I went a little weird on that. So let me show you another example. Let me zero this out. You see how it snaps right back onto the system? What happens if I grab this control and snap it over here? I'm grabbing the outer and I'm moving it over here. Now what happens if I rotate this around like this, and I rotate it down like this, like that? Okay. Are they close to each other? What's the value of my inner control? 0. So in other words, let's say I wanted to make this control look like this instead. Could I do that? What happens if I freeze transforms on that? And you see how it goes back to the other one? Horrible values, good values. However, what's the problem with this control? How often is the animator going to grab the wrong control here? Now, here's the thing. We covered a system earlier on in this month that was actually a major pain in the ass on the system. What type of system did we create earlier in this month that you couldn't select in the perspective view? You were creating them, and you had to make sure you're in your outliner to actually select everything. Your padding or your groups. That invisibility, which was a kind of a pain in the ass last week, is actually a benefit this week, because the animator is not going to accidentally select it in the perspective view. Now, if they go into the outliner, it's kind of like going into your fuse box in your car. If someone's literally take a screwdriver, pop open the fuse box in your car, he's like, look, I can't stop them from doing that. If they're going to do that, then they're just like, if you go into your computer and you open your power supply, which has that giant yellow sticker saying, you open this, you will die, and you open it, there's only one thing you're going to be remembered for is winning the Darwin Award. And that is the only thing on there. So that being said, let's delete this now. Okay, so if you want to follow along, this would be a good time to do this on here. So I'm going to go over this a bunch of times on here. So I'm going to create a circle, like this, okay? And I'm going to group it, okay? So I have my control and my pad. I'm going to call this guy my local, and I'm going to call this one my icon, okay? Anytime I see a pad called local, I know it's going to be a different orientation. It's going to have an offset, okay? So I want to move this system up over here. However, I don't want to eyeball this. I want this to be exact. And you remember, guys, when you saw the constraint podcasts from last week, and I was showing you how you can snap things around? We can use constraints to snap us into position. Matter of fact, parent constraints can snap translation and rotation. So they can be movement tools. So watch this. If I grab this as my driver, now here's the trick. I'm grabbing my pad as my driven here. And then I go into my constraints, into my parent constraints. Remember this guy here? If I turn this off, it doesn't try to preserve that difference. It will snap. Watch right here. Hit apply, and you see how it snaps up there? Let me show you what would have happened if you did this last week. If I said driver and driven here, and I hit apply, of course, what's going on here? Oh, I already had the constraint. Let's do it on this one. Driver, driven, I hit apply. Yeah, I had to get rid of the constraint on this guy. It's because this constraint's already on it. It's supposed to freak out, and it will. Don't worry about it. I say driver, driven, and I hit apply. You see how it snaps down like that? Because it's matching the orientation on it. And when I put the offset on, it remembers the difference between the two of them. So in this case now, since I moved that over, I don't need the constraint anymore. I just used it to move it. So if I delete the constraint here, look at this. I have an exact perfect orientation. See? I'm going to do this again. This is the first time I'm going to do this a bunch of times. Okay? And the pad is up here. Common mistake, people will grab the control instead of the pad. And that ruins the whole system. The pad's got to move over there. Okay, so let me show you that again. I'm going to create a control. Create a circle. Group it. And do you think there's a faster way of doing this? You think I'm going to show it to you? Yes. So I'm going to say local 2. It's also weird, so this is not weird? No, that one's really weird. I'm going to say icon 2, like that. So this is my driver, and my driven's my pad, and I'm going to hit apply. See it snap up? I do not need the constraint anymore. I delete it. Okay? We could check. Are these matching? See how it's not even moving when we look at our axes? Okay? Is that kind of making sense? Okay, so what's this faster way of doing this? Well, let's do that same thing. Control, let's create a control and group it. Okay? Actually, I take that back. I'm just creating my control. And I'm going to call this icon 3, like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to parent this under the joint. So I'm going to say parent, child parent here. Let's just middle mouse drag it underneath there. Under 3, like that. Okay? So I parented it underneath this joint. Or did I do it the other way? Oh, whoops, wrong one. Okay, let's grab this guy. Okay, so I grab my control and I parent it underneath my tail 3. So you see how my control's underneath there? Okay. You see all these nasty values on here? What happens if I zero out these values? Yeah, because those are the offsets onto it. You see how it snapped right over there? So is this really faster? Yeah, when I show you the next step on here. Let me explain to what grouping's really doing. Grouping's creating a pad. And you know when you have something selected, it groups, it parents it underneath that pad, that group, right? However, how does it pick its orientation? It's based upon what its parent is. So if you look above it in its world, guess what the orientation is going to be of the pad? World. But in this case, what is its parent? The joint. So if I grab my control and group it, do you see how it matched its orientation of the joint? But look what else it did. It also matched the pivot point. So now I just unparent the group, and guess what? It's done. I'm going to show you this one a couple more times, because this, like I said, this is kind of voodoo. Local 3. Oh, good. It didn't already. So let me show you that again. I'm going to create a control. I'm going to make a button for my control. I'm getting tired of going in here. Okay. I parent it underneath it, so I shift select where I want to send it and hit P. Okay. I zero that out. Like that. I group it. And I unparent it. And it's done. It's like, what? Yeah, that's kind of crazy when I do that in real time. I'm going to do that one more time so you can see it again. I don't have this on the podcast, so you've got to know how to make this manually. So I'm going to do a circle. I need to parent to this, so I shift select. So hitting P parented to the last thing selected. Now it shifts back to this guy as I zero out my values. Like that. I group it. Because you see it's parented and everything. I'm grouping it. Gives us our pivot point and our pad. And I hit, now since the group is selected after it's actually created, I hit Shift P to unparent it. And there we go. See, it's in spot, got its values. Everything is nice and clean. Local 5. Okay, cool. Are these done? Are these animator ready? Well, when I select these, look at my back controls. What's wrong with these guys? No? What's that? They're lonely. That's actually correct. They are lonely. Why are they lonely? Look at my hierarchy. Are they supposed to look like this? Or are they supposed to look like this? Don't they have to look like the little stepladder? So I'd have to parent these guys together. So it'd be something like this. Oh my God. I hate you so much, Maya. I swear to God. Okay, fuck. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah. Okay. Child, parent. I'm doing this the long way. I don't care. You guys all saw that. I'm not going crazy. I was literally selecting them over and over again the same way. Okay, so it's supposed to look like that, right? So what about these guys? It has to have the same hierarchy. But you can't just parent the controls right together. The pad has to be preserved. So it's going to be pad control and then the pad like this. Then pad control and then the pad like this. So it's still going to look like a step ladder or staircase. It's just going to be a little bigger. There is a downside to this system. You can't pick walk anymore. You can't press up and down on the keyboard to go through because it's going to control pad, and that can make the animator go a little crazy onto it. Are there ways of making tools that you override the pick walking to jump to the controls? Yes, it is. That would be a technical directing job to do something like that. And I would also make sure that the production needed it. So the animators use that type of stuff. Okay? And then the final step would just be constraining them. Driver, driven. Here's a question. I'm only doing rotation. Am I ever doing this? Well, I mean, think about the system. Maybe this is Baymax and his hand shoots off. Is his tail, part of his segment, his tail supposed to rip off? Maybe he's a lizard. Maybe he needs that. In this case, no. So is there any reason to actually put this functionality into my control system? So instead of doing a parent constraint, I can do an orient constraint because I only need to do rotation. Okay? That also being said, if I say driver driven, and this is going to sound like a trick question, but it's not a very big trick question. So I'm going to my orient constraint. Does it matter in this case if the maintain offset is turned on or off? What's that? Not really, because they're at the same exact orientation. Here's a quick test. If this is something like this, and it's off, and I see driver driven, and I hit apply, and you see it move, you did something wrong. So it's a test. So I actually like doing that. Even though it really doesn't hurt it to put an offset into it, making that offset turned off allows me to test to see if I broke something. And I do break things all the time. And I automate things like crazy, which can be dangerous because if your system, if you don't understand or you forget your automation, how it's working, there's times you have to build it manually. So nothing's worse than forgetting how you built a system because you made a button to do it for you. Okay, so you see I can do this now. See? Now, luckily for our project, you're not doing a chain like this. I do have an integrated activity assignment to practice with this. Matter of fact, I'm going to have the rabbit ears where you're going to do one with an IK and one with the FK local system onto it. Pretty much anything that's warping or bending in a weird angle, you're probably going to do a local orient control because you want to keep that orientation as your control, especially something that needs to curl up on itself. Think of like a fern that's actually expanding out. If it's whirled, it's not going to curl on itself. Remember that spider I showed you? I made it so its arms can do this. So guess what my orientations are? Because I want to be able to do this really quickly. But let's say the animator said, no, but I want to do this, forward and back really quickly. So maybe I'll change my orientations to do forward and back. Maybe that's more important than coil up like this. But let's say it's a death animation and he's flopping over like a roach and then coiling up like this. I kind of want to have that nice, simple animation. I don't have to eyeball bringing the actual arms back on themselves. Here's a really cool thing. What if I put a middle pad in between those that had a different orientation? That one orientation is like this, and one orientation is like this. Could I make the control move forward and back and then make an automation system that coils in on itself like that? You just make a pad and just put a different orientation on the pad. So yeah, there's all different types of things that you can do and play around with that stuff. Or I can have second control that does it. One way of getting around gimbal lock is putting a separate control right above it as like a little spoke. in there. So let's say one gets completely messed up, your other control above it's not gimbal locked. Granted, the theory of the animation's all messed up. Your graph editor is going to be all disconnected, but at least you can still animate the thing. So if you just need to do this, but it's kind of like it's doing that, you're like, oh, do it, reach down everything. You can still do that. Again, it matters upon the scenario. And that's why I said you a lot of times in bigger productions get different rigs that do different things. Why would I put that death orientation for a spider when it's a whole different thing? If you notice that spider character, the tessellation on his geometry is pretty low. One of the animations, and eventually we'll probably come back to this, we wanted to have a death animation where his gourd cracked open. That topology does not support that. So is he going to have a different version of the gourd? Yes. So when the character's walking and attacking, he's the normal character, but the second he dies, swaps out the rig, and then you show that crack open and blah. We're doing magic, not reality. So whatever way you can cheat reality, it is not only accepted, it's rewarded. So yes.
In all aspects of life.
Well, you don't want that high tessellation death gourd in there. Why would you take the extra hit on your frames per second on your renderer when you don't need it for a certain second? Now, of course, if you had 100 of those guys cracking open and dying, then we might have to think something more, because that might actually take a hit if all of a sudden all these things shoot up and shoot the tessellation up of it. And let's say it's like now let's really think about that. Let's say at the Diablo game, and you have all these little gourd things coming up underneath a bridge and coming up. That could be a problem. If you have 100 of those things on the screen and all of a sudden their tessellation jumps up 3 times, could that affect the frame rate on the game? Yes, it could. Oh, wait, yes, you got it. That's why sometimes you have too many characters, and if they're changing their rigs out, it could mess up those things. So, yeah, that could happen. So, you never know. And the crazier thing is not every project deals with those things. That's why don't worry about everything you don't know. Worry about problem solving, reacting to a problem, focusing on it, researching, and solving the problem as quickly as possible to get new problems that pop out of it. Not worrying about all the things you don't know. I can throw down things every day that will scare the crap at you don't know. I do the same thing, but eventually you got to realize you might never rig those things. So you can't understand reality and how it works. You can only stand the reality of that moment and go from there. No, it's Halloween, exactly. I watched Stranger Things. I binge watched Stranger Things, so I'm very.
There it is.
Which was really good. If you haven't seen it, it's like the new season's great. Doesn't lose a beat from last year's one. It's good. I don't want to spoil. I won't spoil anything. I didn't think they were going to kill Elle in the first episode. That was really surprising.
I saw that. It's one of those things. Like, I love these 4 things. There's 4 images, and one that was like Elle dies, and I was like, "Are you kidding?"
Okay, you good online? Honestly, yeah.
Game of Thrones is like, who could we kill next?
It's awesome. You should definitely see it.
Like who would be most shocking to die next? The answer is nobody.
They have their own Deadpool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go into my hand system, and I'm going to go into my arms complete, and I want to talk about this, because this is going to be the last part I'm going to talk about today. I wasn't just talking about that for argument's sake. I wanted to show you what we're going to use that for. Now, if I was doing, you remember that stem that I created? Could I have made FK controls for the stem? I could, but think about how they rotate. If I wanted to squash it up and down, you see how that would have been a pain in the ass to rotate those around? Wasn't a viable control for that. The mandibles, though, could I have coiled them in and out like this? I could, but they almost were like little arms. So I wanted to keep an IK system in there, but I still needed to do this with the claws. If you ever look at a spider, he's got mandibles come out here, but then his claws are just like this. So, I want to be able to do that type of thing. Think of like a kangaroo, like punching arms, like that. I want to be able to do that type of stuff on there. So that's why I'm focusing on indirect systems, because I look at each part as its own thing. What does it need to do? What mechanically does it need to solve onto it? I'm more interested in learning different ways of little problem solvings. That's why I look like mechanical systems and see how they work. And I can actually convert those and use those organically. Anytime you do a tutorial, try to throw it into something that you're working on and see how that, Because that's the real thing is your rigging. That's a real thing. And it doesn't even matter if you're modeling or you're animating. It's when you apply it to a real scenario, you'll find chaos comes out really quickly. You're like, oh, well, this doesn't work for any of these things. And how you result that, that is industry. That's what you're solving. Because every studio is going to take a little bit different angle, and it's going to change everything on how you're focusing on that problem. And there's no way avoiding it. You got to pick a direction and go, and then you're going to have to deal with the retribution of the problems that come up with that direction you made. And that's what we do. Okay, so here we have our arms on here. Now what you're really going to have to do is this. You see where I have my arm, and I grab my arm, and you see how the hand control is following along? But you see how it's actually matching the orientation like this? We're only going to make 2 local orient controls on this rig. This right and left hand. So we're not doing a whole doing now. If you decide to do extra credit for the IK-FK system, the FK system, that's where that leads into. And you will, like I said, you'll have some practice with the ears. In I think that's actually, it might be today. No, I think it's actually Thursday. That does it on the ear. So you could practice one ear's FK and one ear's IK, and we do it that one. Just out of curiosity, though, if you're doing antenna, FK can work for that. Only thing is IKs can do this thing. You know how like antennas like feel? That actually gives a nice little tap and everything like that. Anybody remembers A Bug Life, which was really weird that Kevin Spacey was Hopper? I still don't like, really? He was completely Hopper. Yeah, he was Hopper. And he's going, and he's like feeling him, and it's like, I don't sense this on you as he's like hitting his antenna onto him. He's like, but yeah, that would probably be better to do with IKs. But like bunny ears and things like that, you can do coiling and do things like that. Or you can do IKs up to this far, and then do FK the rest of it. So you can do this type of thing. So yeah, and you could just build a control here. Think of this as a wrist. It's like, there's all different ways of approaching it. Okay, so we're going to solve these guys on here. These are local oriented controls. So we're going to do that thing again on here, and you're going to see the view. I'm going to do it the long way, the one that's in the original podcast and everything on that. Okay, so I'm going to go into my hand. I'm going to say connect hand. I'm going to say create hand icon. Okay, so I'm going to create a circle. Like that. I'm going to group it. Like this. At the end of the day, I don't care how you get that control into position as long as it's oriented properly. Okay, so my driver in this case is this one here. Now this guy is pretty close to world. The rabbit is not. The rabbit is like he's angled down, so it's definitely a different orientation on that. So this is our driver, and our driven is our control we just did right here, this guy. Here. So I'm holding on Command, and I select my driven. And what's my next step on here? I want to move my pad over to my joint. Right. We turn our maintain offset off, and I hit apply, and you see that snaps right up. Common mistake. Instead, students will grab my joint and then my control on here, and then move that. This is wrong, because you see how the pad's still back here? That's wrong. And I see this a lot where a student will actually do it correct on one arm, and they'll lose their focus, and on the other arm they'll make that mistake. So I hit control and pad like that, and hit apply, boom. I do not need this constraint. I delete it. Okay. Is this a good control? It's hard to see, isn't it? Can I move a control out like this? It does get weird values. Think of the back. Could I move my controls from my back around? Like, think of the neck. Was I able to move the control up? Yeah, what I had to do to fix that. I had to move the pivot back down. So I had to do the same thing here. Hence, remember, real world problem, so things change onto it. The tail's easy. So I grabbed this one as my, that's my driver, and I hit D and V, and I snap it right back down onto the joint. Is this a valid control? No. However, is the pad's orientation still local? Yes. So guess what happens when I freeze this guy out? Click. See? Goes right to that orientation. Is now that a valid control? Yes. So this is my left hand icon. Okay. Now I know for the guys that are animators in here, a lot of animators love to have the IK, the arm, and the hand at one control. It causes some complications with gimbal lock when I do that. That's why I do not have that. It's the same thing. If I had an animator screaming for it to be on one, I would do it, but I wouldn't be happy about it.
You would do something else and mess it up.
No. I mean, I wouldn't be vindictive about it. I would just be like, I would warn them there's going to be consequences to that. But if they're like, okay, no, I'll do it. Okay. You want me to do that again on the other side? You want me to do the faster method on the other side? Okay. So I create a circle. I'm going to parent it underneath this joint. So that's my child. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag it right underneath there. Miracle, miracle, it actually worked. Okay, I'm going to group it. Boom. There it is. Oh, actually, I'm stupid. I missed a step. I didn't move it. So I need to zero this out first. Now I group it. Okay, and now I just unparent it. Boom, that guy's done. Let's name this guy. This is my right hand local. This is my right hand icon. Left hand local. So you see, if I see on my rig the word local, I know it's a different orientation. It's something specific. If I see pad, it's world. That's my rig. That's not industry standard or anything like that. I just like to be able to look and know that this rig is telling me things just by looking at the things on it, and that helps me out a lot. Okay. Okay, this guy's almost done. I just need to move it down. I do need to see my geometry. Freeze it. Move my pivot point down. Does pivot point matter on this control? Is it a rotational system? Are we going to do this? So yeah, pivot point's very important on this. If it was a translation system, then it wouldn't. Okay? Those are those two controls. Cool? Okay. So that being said, I'm going to move on to my next one because that has that done. I'm going to go into pin hands. Okay. Cool. Is there any questions on local orientation? I spent a bunch of time talking about it. I can't express how important it is to understand local and world-oriented controls. And we've been stretching this between last class and this class, between the two of these. Everything was world on that. I'll tell you right now, you don't want to create local orientations for everything. Your back's orientations are doing this. They're curving. Well, if I do local orientations, the controls orientation are going to do this. Instead of you getting a nice clean, think about the neck and head. You want this for the neck and head, right? Well, if your back are curled like that, the controls are going to be skewed like that too. So I don't necessarily want local orientation for everything. It's really a scenario based. Yeah, and also think about it, your back's not going to rotate around 180 degrees. Unless you're an owl, you're not going to do that. It could be, you know, maybe I'm an alien, maybe I can do that. So it is Halloween. It's like today I can do all kinds of stuff and you'll never be without me on that stuff. Okay, so in this case, however, when I grab my arm, I want this control to fall along. Okay, so quick thing here. Driver, driven for my hand, right? We want our hand control to dominate our hand joints. I am going to do a parent constraint on this. And the reason is because I want to dominate both translation and rotation. I'm going to show you why in that in a second. I'm going to do a constraint. I'm going to do parent. Does it matter if maintain offset's turned on or off here? Yeah. So if we have it off, it does apply on here. And now watch what happens. I do this. See how it moves? But now we're actually overriding the translation and rotation of the system. So that means if I grab my arm, do you see how the joint's still trying to move around? It's got that phantom limb type of thing, twitching around and everything. So that being said, is there a possibility that a rig could have a hand that breaks itself off from our arm? Yeah. Yes, Baymax. He did the whole fist punching thing. He's punching people in the face and everything like that. That is a possibility. Does this rig, do we want our character's hand to fly off from our arm? Maybe we're doing RoboCop. Maybe we're doing Ash from Evil Dead 2. You never know. So in this case, no, we do not want that. So we're going to have to reestablish that connection. And the reason why we did this thing where we did this is because I can control how it's rotating and translating. So the first version of this I'm going to cover is the actual, like, the basic one we're requiring in class. And then I'm going to reiterate back and show you a more advanced way onto it, okay? So this one here, I want to make sure that my arms values are trickling into my control. Now we do have a pad here that has all these weird values on it. However, if I go down to my arm wrist, think of it as water going down like this. You have two types of water. We have hot and cold, okay? Let's say hot is translation and rotation is cold, okay? In this case, I want both of these to be traveling down. So I grab my end of my system. Think of this as the pipe. This is the end of our pipe, and I grab that as my driver, and my driven is my pad here, okay? If I actually set these up, now, are these both the same orientation? No. This is world. And this guy is actually local. It looks like they're close. They are not the same thing on here. Like I said, the rabbit will be easier to show the difference on it. So I am actually going to select my end and then my local. I said this is going to be the easy, fast system onto it. So I'm going to actually turn my offset on and hit apply. Watch what happens now. You see how the control moves with the hand, but yet the hand still dominates it. So what am I really doing is I'm taking the values coming down through the arm and then connecting them into the pad through a constraint, which is going down into the control for the hand. It's going back into the hand. So it's like this weird, like, magnet connecting system between the two. Now you're saying, why don't I just parent these guys together? That's true, but then I couldn't do stuff like this. I couldn't put my hand against the wall and do this system here. You see, this is called a world-oriented hand, where my hand's being constricted by there. Let's say I'm standing on a table, and I'm actually shouting at somebody. I'm like bowing down. I want my wrist to actually obey what I'm holding down onto. These are world-oriented controls. However, when I lift my arm up and I move my hand like I'm waving at somebody, I don't want world-oriented controls for stuff like that. I want to be able to blend between the two. This system right here, the local-oriented system, is what's required in our class. Extra credit to do the local world. I have a podcast where it's specifically what I'm going to cover right now. But for animators, knowing that this exists and knowing how to switch between these two things are very important. And David has one on the practice one at the end of our activities for this week. He has one that goes more involved on doing different, like connecting to the head, to the hips, and things like that as well. Okay, so I am going to undo what I did right there, just with the constraint. Okay, cool. So now it's this. Okay, so here's the solving system for the new one on here. What we need is, for one thing, is we still want, is there any time where we want the hand to break away? No. So if we do a point constraint for this, so I say driver driven, and in this case go into my constraints and do a point constraint. Now point constraint's translation. So I hit apply. Now the offset didn't matter here because the pivot points were on each other. So now watch what happens. This is a local oriented hand. Do you see how it's staying behind? And if I lift up my shoulder, do you see how it stays locked down? So if I'm lifting up from a table. However, if I had to animate this, if I was swinging my hand forward, I'd have to counter rotate my arm every time. That is called insanity. If I had to keep on doing, if I had to keep on doing this. See, if he's just walking, you'd have to keep on adjusting the hand. I've had animators that just, I want that. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I know you're going to come back and ask for the other one, but sure, it's going to come to there. Okay, so now how do I do the rotation? Now here's the thing is that when I do the rotation, I want to have two separate targets. I want to have my world, which is right here, this stuff, but I also want my local where it travels up like this. So we luckily have a perfect orientation for these. The pad here has the orientation for this. So if I duplicate this twice, and I get rid of the control system and all the other stuff underneath it. Do you see I have a pad that has both the same orientations as the pad here? They're all the same on here. Wait, what's going on? Oh, that's the other one. Oops. It's getting worried there. Okay. So you see how these are all the same position and orientation right here? Okay. So that being said, I'm going to call this. This one right here is going to be my left arm local. And this is going to be my left hand world. Like that. Okay, what? Okay, well nothing is going to touch this one. This is going to be left alone. So this is one of our targets that nothing is manipulating. So this is our world. This guy though, I'm going to parent him underneath my arm waist. Why am I doing that? Because this has exactly the same orientation as this system here. They match. The magnets are exactly the same thing. So this is my local, and this is my world on here. So what game am I playing here? Well, I've been kind of lying to you a little bit. When I've been doing constraints, I've been doing driver driven. That's not correct. It's actually drivers and driven. You can grab multiple drivers and then driven. So you can have multiple things controlling things. So think of a spider web and you want a spider to go to different corners of the web. You can actually put different points on there. And as you turn one weight on, it goes towards that one or goes to the other one onto it. So you can tell it which one it wants to be onto it. So in this case, if I select my driver and then my second driver, and whatever's last is my driven, which is my local, it's going to be local world and then my pad on here. Now watch this. If I go into my orient constraint, and I'm going here, and I actually do not care if this is turned on or off because they're the same orientation. I hit apply. Oh shoot, I grabbed my right, didn't I? Did again. Local, world, and then my pad. I hit apply. Okay, so now watch what happens. When I move it, you see how it's it looks like it's local, but it's not quite local. It's halfway in between local and world right now. Why is that? Because our pad is now have two drivers. You see how it says one on both of these guys? That means it's on for both. It means it's halfway in between. So if I turn local off, you see how it's world? Like that. If I go back in here and swap these, see how it's local on there? Do you ever want the animator messing with that? Am I have ability to turn a switch to turn those on and off? Yes. Today's actual integrated, we'll go over what's called set-driven keys, which are one of my favorite things into it. That allows you to automate. It's actually really easy to do. It'll look a little bit weird on here because you've never seen it before, but that allows you to do, like, if you want to have a character breathing and you want his like rib cage to expand, or maybe the textures to change, or maybe you want wrinkling to form up in the character's head, or you want a bolt action on a rifle to be able to switch, or you want like cartridges to pop out at certain rates and things like that. That's kind of where you also get that type of stuff on there. Set-driven keys. Mm-hmm. They are, and it's kind of, that's a little different because that stuff from Maya doesn't translate into the engine. It has to be rebuilt into that engine onto it. The only thing that leaves out of Maya and goes into a game engine is the joints, the bind between the joints in that, the keyframes on it, and obviously the geometry and the UVs and that type of stuff. The actual controls don't translate. So the IKs don't translate. The constraints don't translate. That's why if the engine doesn't support indirect systems, if they don't support the constraints, nothing supports the constraints. That's why if it doesn't deal with just the keyframes on things, it won't work onto it. Yeah, the engine, let's say you have an animation, let's say you're playing a Call of Duty and you're doing a belly crawl on the ground. They're not coming up with all the different animations to do different leveling across the ground. The actual animation reacts to the ground. So it actually will lift up, but keep the same animation. So he'll curl across the ground, but he has the same animation cycle. So you can have IK systems. Let's say a character's punching a wall. You don't want his arm going through the wall. You want to put a barrier, and the IK acts to the wall. That stuff will be built in engine. And actually, Unreal has systems where you show him where he's walking upstairs and going downstairs. He's got the same animation on there, but now he's going upstairs. His legs lift up as he goes up and things like that. So yeah. There's all different types of things. Film, you don't have to worry about that stuff because it's all, you know, but it's a whole nother world. Okay, so let me show you this last part on this. Okay. So I want to put a switch on this control. So I'm going to create an attribute. Again, you're going to do that today in lab. And I'm going to call this local world. And I'm going to put a min and max of 0 to 10. Now these are it's just a blank attribute. It's not doing anything at this point. It says local and world, but when I slide back and forth, it's not doing anything. But I'm going to make it do something now. So watch when I go into my set driven key menu and I say driver, I'm going to grab my local world and my driven, hey, I wonder where I got that terminology from. And I go into my orient constraint and select driven. Here's my weights. Right now I'm in local mode and my thing is set to 0, so I'm going to say key. Here's the thing. Set-driven keys are just like normal keyframes. But instead of time driving the animation, it's an attribute. It's a value from something else. So now, if I go to local world and I set this to 10, and I go back to my constraint and I flip-flop those guys around, so I go this, 0. Think about turning a light system on and off in a room. That's all I'm doing here. You don't see it that way, but it really is that basic. I say key and watch this. I grab my arm. See how it's in world mode? I grab this and whoop. See? Oh, that's this one here. Yeah, now he's mixing a fat beat. Like that. So yeah, that's the type of thing. That's actually a really important philosophy in rigging, is to be able to create custom attributes and make them do different things. Breathing, swallowing, automation, and things like that. That's all different types of stuff. We're going to spend a lot more time on that. You're going to do your fingers, like curling of your fingers are going to be done with set-driven keys. I also have, like today, to show you direct connections where you're pumping that water right into things directly instead of doing keyframing systems and things like that. Again, I'm showing you lots of things. Don't take this as like religion, as you have to do it this way. It's taking all these tools and applying different something else. So even if you're not a setup artist, if you're doing look dev and lighting, and you telling me I can't just put a control with a bunch of attributes that control the intensity of your lights and things like that and different stuff like that? Absolutely. Why should I have to go dig through menus after menus after menus? Nothing's cooler than demoing the lighting system yourself when you just have controls and you can just automate and keyframe all those things and are all right there onto it. So like you're doing night to day switches and things like that. So you're doing a look dev scene where you're transitioning from night to day and everything like that. That would look really badass on a reel to show you, because the things you don't see on look dev is that people don't move the camera around their scene. They keep that one shot of that cake. It looks great. Well, I mean, it should probably do that, but adding a little camera motion adds a lot more style to it, onto it. And then actually transitioning from different times of day and seeing how the materials react to that. Having an outdoor cafe and seeing it turn into dusk and having the lights come on and everything like that. That adds a lot of style. And we're not, so that type of stuff does make you stand out and everything like that. Cool. You guys good? So you still have the fingers. Yes, that's actually half of it is doing this, the 25% on this, and the other half is doing the fingers, creating the attributes on that. The fingers are actually pretty easy. This isn't hard, but it's weird. It's a different technology you haven't seen before, but it opens up the world into a whole bunch of things. Hopefully next class I'll be able to show you even more branches off. And you kind of saw a couple things with my rigs and how I'm approaching on it. Hopefully you're seeing that it's like, don't take things by, has to be this way. Think about what it's actually doing under the hood. Really challenge yourself on that. And think, even though if you're not rigging, think how can you apply this to your own thing. Obviously animation's pretty easy. Modeling's a little harder on this stuff because it's like, what am I doing to show this stuff off onto it? But for visual effects and look dev, for shading and lighting and things like that, and even compositing and showing different things popping in and kind of reacting, it shows a lot of stuff on there. Okay? You good online too? But that's pretty much what I got for you guys here. Everybody's like, oh, can we go? We'll go.